Hello again, dear students. Here we are starting Module 3, which is the second part of Romeo and Juliet. And by now, I think you guys are starting to become expert at detecting desire and all of its shapes and forms in the text. So today what I'd like to do is kind of do a top 10 of all the kinds of desires that we see in the play. Okay, so let's start with number 1, the passionate desire and love between Romeo and Juliet that eventually leads them to defy their families and marry in secret, right? So this is probably the most central desire, obviously the most obvious, right? Because it's based on love, right? And carnal desire as well. But it's not the only kind of desire, even though it's the most obvious. Number 2, the desire for revenge. The desire for revenge will eventually, in this play, lead to the death of Mercutio and Tybalt, right? That heightens the tensions and the conflict in the play. If we didn't have the desire for revenge, obviously the entire plot would be different, right? Revenge exists before the play begins, right? Before we enter in the story of Romeo and Juliet, we already have the desire for revenge as a pre-existing condition. Number 3, we have the conflicting desires in both Romeo and Juliet, right? Inside each character, they have to deal with desires that are in conflict, right? Because they do love each other, that's desire number 1, but they also have the desire to remain loyal to their families, right? And those conflicts of desires in this story, as much as in other stories that we know, when characters have conflicting desires, we know that usually it ends pretty bad. And obviously this is a tragedy, so it's supposed to end in a very bad way. Number 4, we're going to be looking this time in number 4 at Juliet's desperate desire to avoid marrying Paris, right? Because it's also a desire. We always think of desire as something that people want, but desire can also be negative, right? It's the not wanting. In this case, she does not want to marry this man. She has a desire to marry another man, right? So that is also a kind of desire, which is desperate desire. Number 5. This time, this might be the less obvious desire in the play, because here we're dealing with the desire for communication, right? Desire for understanding through communication, right? It doesn't happen because the play is full of misunderstandings. It's also full of miscommunications on purpose, right? And those misunderstandings and those miscommunications result in the tragic death, right? Number 6, the desire for peace and reconciliation between the two families, between the Capulet and the Montagues, after the lovers tragically die, right? Obviously, this is something that we see in a lot of different stories, in different cultures. The death of a person, or two persons in this case, will eventually provoke a new desire for the people that are remaining behind to reconfigure their existence, right? And in the case of these two families, the sacrifice of their future, right? Juliet being a descendant and Romeo, both of them dead, that will create a new kind of desire for the future. Okay, now number 7, the consequences of desire and the underlying tensions that drive the feuding between the two families, leading eventually to their death, right? And loss and tragedy in general, right? So desire has its own consequences. Number 8. This one is very typical of Shakespeare, but it's also observed in other plays by other playwrights. When you have secondary characters, right? Here I'm talking about the friar, Friar Lawrence, and the nurse, right? They both also have the desire to help Romeo and Juliet, right? But that desire ultimately contributes to their death, right? So here we're talking about the punished desire. Number 9, the destructive power of desire. Obviously, it's not something we only observe in Romeo and Juliet. There are plenty of stories out there where you will see that same emphasis on the destructive power of desire, right? So the profound sense of grief and loss felt by the remaining characters, right, is also not always about reconciliation, but also about destruction. And number 10 is obviously the exploration of the consequences of unchecked desire and the tragic outcome of the passionate love between Romeo and Juliet, right? We are frustrated because the story leads us to believe that there will be some kind of happy ending, right? Even though it's a tragedy, so we know from the get-go that happy endings never happen. But this idea of unchecked desire is absolutely crucial in order to understand the whole network of desire and desiring behaviors that we observe in the play. This week I will ask you to focus particularly on a passage. Please be careful, take your time, read it several times, and try to come up with your own reflection. I'm also very happy to say that last module was extremely successful. I have really enjoyed hearing about your personal experiences and how you would connect that with the little bit of theory that we already saw. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of that in the future. Now, this is the last module on Romeo and Juliet because we'll be spending 2 modules on each text. And now we will be transitioning next week with It's Streetcar Named Desire, which is also a tragedy in a way, and a tragedy about desire. Yet it's much more modern, right, as we will see. So please pay attention at all the different components of this module for the week, and I will see you next week.